I love the countdown.
Yeah.
Gotta love the countdown.
Having meaningful conversations and building lots of relationships is great, but it doesn't always result in something tangible. It doesn't always lead to business. Today, we look at this last piece of the business development cycle. My name is Tobias Steinemann, and here with me is the man who many attorneys turn to with their closing issues, Bill Burns.
It's great to be with you again, Toby.
Bill, for me, this episode could be a real game changer because quite often I find myself in a sales conversations and I get a bit insecure about whether there is more that I can or should do to increase my chances of getting the business.
Well, you're a very good closer. You talked me into doing this podcast. I think that if you're unsure, that's something to listen to. That's a voice in your head that I would listen to that's telling you, I haven't asked all the questions I need to ask. I haven't gotten all the information I need to get from this client. I'm a little unsure about some aspect of either the work or their arrangements for the work or the budget for the work. So I think you need to listen to that voice and follow up with it.
And again, I think it's something that, I went through legal training, right? So it's a very knowledge-based training, and we're never exposed to any sort of similar situations. But then again, as we enter practice and we're required to build a business and a business case, these kind of sales conversations and closing deals is something that is very real to a lawyer's life. You as a business development executive, I expect you have many great closers in your firm and you know a lot of people who are good at closing deals. Do you see any sort of similarities or like common qualities that you would say make them great deal closers?
Well, I know a lot of people who are very good closers, but it's an interesting mix of traits that they have. But there are some commonalities. Some of them are viewed very much as someone who can help the client or the prospect. I mean, that's critically important. If you're the client or the prospect, you get the feeling from that attorney that they want to win as much or more as the client wants to win. They're really invested in what the client wants to achieve. People who are great closers are incredibly curious. They ask questions and drill down, as we just discussed a second ago, to find out really where any objections are or where any issues are that haven't been brought to the surface. And while they are all fantastic listeners, they're also very proactive about actually asking for the work.
So interested people, proactive people, curious, passionate people, these are all qualities, but it's not, if I understand correctly, it's not really a specific personality type that is required.
I know plenty of attorneys who are introverted people who are extremely good at closing deals, at getting business, people who have taken the time to hone their skills. They've been very honest about their shortcomings, and they've spent the time improving on those shortcomings. And they do those things I talked about. They listen well, they ask questions, and they actually ask for the work.
You mentioned that it's important to ask questions, and a business development process is not something that is announced. Okay, we move to the next stage now. We move to the next stage. So, at what point do I really know we're now at the closing stage? Because in many situations many closing situations or proposal situations, I feel like there are still open questions, but the client is really pushing for a quote, and they always, at least to me, it feels a bit like they are looking for the least complicated kind of provider, and that's the one that gives them a proposal, because then they can go back and compare numbers.
It really causes issues for the attorney if you let the prospect or the client rush the process, because there are usually issues that haven't been covered, and they're going to come up later on. Often these things end up as a race to the lowest cost. And is that really the business you want? I think you have to ask yourself, is this a client that's going to be a good client to work?
So, I'm just pushing for all the answers that I need, irrespective of whether the client says, okay, no, I need that quote now.
I think you can give them the quote, but I think you have to take the attitude of, you have to put in some considerations that indicate that you don't have the full picture. We're often asked to, give a quote on a potential deal with very little information. And so we will give them a pretty broad range and tell them it depends on a number of factors that haven't been determined.
And in these scenarios, are the other providers doing the same thing?
Well, sometimes the other providers aren't doing the same thing. Sometimes they're just giving you a price quote that they think gets them the work. I mean, it's no fun to not win the work, but at the same time, the attorney's time is valuable. And we're interested in doing things the right way. We're interested in having relationships that are going to be relationships that we want to be involved in. You don't want to be in a situation where you're thinking half the time that you're doing the work, what I'd really like to do is fire the client.
So also knowing who to say no to and what kind of work not to do, follow some guidelines you have and the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, not every opportunity is the right opportunity for you as an attorney or for your firm.
Mm.
Sometimes the prospect can't pay your hourly rates. Sometimes the prospect has not thought the project through. Some prospects, some clients are just not any fun to work with. They're going to be very high maintenance, and you're always going to be, on a short tether. You have to make a decision about whether you want to pursue that type of business or not.
You mentioned the price before. So is being like the cheapest option in the whole pile of offers for the client, is that a strategy that leads to closing a deal?
One of my biggest pet peeves is that attorneys are afraid to properly value their work, their experience, their training, their insights. They're happy to talk about all the great things that they've done, but when it comes down to talking about rates, they too often want to offer a discount. They're afraid that the client won't pay the rate. They are never going to think you're worth that hourly rate if you don't feel like you're worth that hourly rate. I just don't understand why attorneys are hesitant to be straightforward about their hourly rates. They've worked hard to attain that position, to obtain that experience, to attain those insights. They should be paid for it.
And it's also a bit of again what you mentioned before. Not every opportunity is the right opportunity, right? I mean, you can ask for a litigation attorney, but following a completely different objective than another client who is looking for a litigation attorney. In our business, if we have a law firm client who is looking for a website, let's say that's the request that they have. But I mean, there's completely different objectives behind the requests that are possible. Some just want a URL where people can find their contact details, and some have a bit more, I don't know, a bit higher ambitions, and they want to have a good branding and multiple functionalities that allow for engagement with the users. So our job is basically to figure out what kind of solution are we proposing or putting a quotation out there. And that basically sets then the baseline with what other price offers we are competing with. But essentially, it's about the solution that the client needs or wants.
Absolutely. And that's why you have to ask all those questions. You have to drill down to really understand what it is the client wants to achieve. We had one of these situations recently in my firm where we outlined for a client what we thought was necessary to achieve their objective. They went with another firm. 3 months later, they called us and said, "You were right. What you proposed was the right way to go. We've been 3 months with this other firm and we haven't even, we're at ground zero. We'd like to talk to you again." You want to develop that type of reputation as being a straightforward and valuable advisor. And you're never really going to have an opportunity to develop great relationship with an organization that's looking at your service as a commodity. We were involved in a online auction a couple of years ago for a company. Spent a lot of time coming up with our strategies. We had our, first offer, our second offer, depending on how it went during the auction. So we start the auction, and within the first 20 seconds of the auction, there's a price offer that is lower than the lowest we would ever think to go. So, we went ahead and put in our numbers and figured, we're not going to get this work. And in the end, we didn't get the work. Another firm got the work. About 6 months later, we got a call from the client because, the other firm had bid very low, but then they'd had 6 months of complaining about the fact that they weren't getting an adequate price for their work, and so they came to us for a project. Later on, I ended up having a conversation with an attorney in that firm that got the work, and he said that, the relationship was just got off to a bad start from the very beginning based on the price differential, that they made a mistake by going so low with their price to win the work. They thought that they could later on get better rates once they had the work, but that proved not to be true at all.
Mm. Yeah, industries that engage in price wars are never in a good in a good place. I think that's really not something that should be encouraged as a business development strategy. So the price is basically something that we put there in our quotation. Another question is the budget situation on the client side, and obviously it's interesting and good to know if the client has a certain budget for a specific project. In my experience, a lot of clients, they don't have a budget, a clear budget, or they don't even have an idea about the budget or what it could be. Do you ask for budgets always? Is that a requirement that you need to put in a quotation, or how do you deal with budget issues on the client side?
I think it's important to always ask the client about a budget. And if they don't have a budget, then to have a pretty detailed conversation about what the cost of a particular matter is going to be and why it's going to be that. Um, so it's an opportunity to educate the client about how legal services are delivered and priced. But I think it's a mistake to just gloss over the whole budgeting issue, because that way, if you do that, then it's pretty clear that the client or the prospect has no idea why you're proposing a certain price. They have no idea what's behind that. They don't really understand the value of what you're delivering.
Are clients happy to give you their budget, or isn't that an invitation for clients to basically give you a low number? So you think that this is their kind of limit, and then you quote something that is lower than this number that they told you.
It's always a little bit of a dance. I think that the prospect always wants to get as much as they can for as little cost as possible. And I think you have to have those honest conversations in between where you figure out what the right pricing scenario is that meets the needs of both the client and the firm.
So it's basically an initial test for how good the relationship is, because if it is something that should be sustainable over a certain period of time, it requires both parties to benefit from it. So if you don't agree on a fair pricing, then at some point you end up having these discussions, okay, because someone feels it's not really a balanced relationship.
Right.
Mm. So another thing that always is an issue are these proposal documents. Do you have any formal things that we need to pay attention to when we actually hand in these kind of proposals? Do you have some sort of magic formula on how to structure a good proposal document?
Well, I wouldn't call it a magic formula, but I think it comes down to a couple of different scenarios. If you're in a request for proposal scenario, then I think it's very important to read the entire proposal to understand exactly how the information, how they're requesting that they receive the information, and to present it in the order that they ask you to present the information. I think it's important to hit the key points very hard, very upfront, and very clearly. I think it's important to use bullet points. I think less is more. I think it's important to make sure that it's a very digestible document, that's something someone wants to read, and that the key points that you're trying to make are very obvious and jump out at the reader.
So you think actually that the proposal documents, they can really turn the needle? Because I mean, quite often it feels like the client already knows who they want to work with, but then still they're like collecting proposals because they have to. Either it's procurement reasons, or the management asks for multiple proposals, or it's just because they think it's good practice. But on some level, they already know who to work with, and then they just figure out a way how to turn it.
Well, in those situations, I mean, a lot of people like to respond to RFPs, just blind RFPs, where they don't have a relationship. And actually, I think those are just pricing exercises where they're looking for the lowest number they can find, or looking to drive the price down on their existing provider. And I'm always hesitant about responding to blind RFPs where there's no relationship.
So maybe even in situations where there's no RFP, I can also give you an example from my practice. So we got asked to meet with the marketing department of a big law firm here in Switzerland. I mean, it wasn't an RFP situation, but we at some point in the process found out that they asked about, I don't know, 15 to 20 different marketing agencies. And from the beginning, I had the feeling that they're not looking for a small agency like us, but they're looking for a big company. So, but still, we figured, okay, this time we're going to go through the process. It's a good exercise to do this every once in a while. So we saw it a bit of as practice, and we had personal conversations with them. We asked all the questions that we thought were relevant, put in an offer with a broad range as reflective of the risks that or the open questions that were still there. And in the end, we didn't get the contract. And one of the point that why we didn't progress in the process was because they went with an agency with, I don't know, 100 employees. So there was less risk involved with going with one of these bigger agencies.
That happens all the time in terms of, a bet the company deal or a bet the company matter, where a name firm is going to get the work just because if things go south, they can always tell the board, well, we hired XYZ that everybody knows of, and they're the best. And it's a little bit of CYA that's involved in situations like that. Coming back to the RFP point, you asked about, can your response to an RFP and can that make a difference? It absolutely can. We recently won a piece of work because we were the only firm that gave them alternative fee arrangements, which were asked for in the RFP. So we came up with a couple of different scenarios that kind of matched what the prospect had told us. And when we won the work, they told us that we got the work for a number of reasons, but one was because we were apparently the only agency or the only firm that read the entire RFP and responded to everything they asked for.
What kind of alternative fee arrangements were you proposing in that specific case?
We offered them a certain amount of hours on a discounted rate just for them to call and ask us questions out of the blue, and then that the clock really wouldn't start ticking until it became an actual matter. And they really liked that approach because they were looking for advice. They were an organization that they had a lot of questions about how they were going to proceed, and they thought that gave them the best chance for having someone who could advise and counsel them along the way without everything turning into a billable matter. So Toby, let me ask you, when you get down to the point where you've asked all your questions, you're feeling pretty good, you're ready to ask for the business, how do you go about asking for the business?
I don't really do that in a sense that I ask them directly. But what we obviously do is we hand in the proposal and say, okay, we would like to work with you. If you have any question, come back to us. Would you consider that asking, or is there anything else that we could do to increase our chances in that scenario?
Well, I think one of the things that I think is a kind of like a magic question to ask is there any reason that we can't do business together? Because that will identify any objections that are hanging out there. I think there are three different ways to actually ask for the business. One is most obvious, which is a voice close, which is to say, directly ask for the business. And if they hesitate, then it's pretty clear that you have some other question to answer. And it may be the question about budget or costs. I think another way to ask for the business is the advice close, where you give them advice related to the opportunity or the problem, or you tell them how you worked with someone else on that issue. And it gives them a sense that they're not alone, that this is the normal way to proceed. I think the third method is if you're meeting someone face to face is the silent close. We all have a tendency to continue to talk and talk and talk. And when we do that, we don't give the prospect or the client the opportunity to ask the question they want to ask or make the comment that they want to make. So sometimes it's just really important just to be quiet and let them speak, let them raise the issue or ask the question that they've been hesitant to ask you.
But if we're staying with asking for the business for a second here, so you say you called it a voice close, I think. So you pick up the phone and call the client and say, hey, can I can I get your business?
I think it's, you call them up on the phone and have that direct conversation, or you meet with them face to face and, say, is there any reason we can't move forward on this project? I think it's important to. I think, I think you're trying to get to either yes or no. Maybe is no good. Maybe does not work. You want to get an answer and you want to move on.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you ask for the business? If you are of the view that you are the one adding value to the client's business or their matter or the problem that they're facing, then why not asking for that piece of work? Because essentially you're helping, even though afterwards obviously the client's going to pay you for your help, but still you're also contributing to their problem solving.
Absolutely.
Do you do free work for clients upfront sometimes in order to convince them to work with you? Like you provide studies or opinions or talks or workshops or do small assessments just to show your capabilities?
Yes, we do. Sometimes what I like to do is ask the client for a small project that's, very narrowly defined. It's not going to cost a lot of money, just to show them what we can do and to establish a working relationship. I think real relationships are developed when you work together on a problem or an opportunity. That's when you really get to know the other party. That's when you begin to appreciate their talents and their skills. Having that type of opportunity can really lead to additional work. Um, Hesitant to give away work. I think that once you give something for free, someone's always going to expect it to be free. But that doesn't mean you can't do a small project. It's clearly defined, or like you said, offer to do a presentation or to do kind of to audit a situation to just determine what the real depth of an issue is.
But you charge for these projects. It's just smaller projects, so there's less risk involved. They don't have to take that big of a leap of faith in you and your firm.
Exactly. Well said, Toby.
Thank you. Bill, many thanks. I look forward to speaking to you soon. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks, Toby.